Hi, I'm Elliott Brennan, and this is Jonny Brennan. We're here today to talk about practice management. As we sit and reflect on what we could give in a short video that would be worthwhile to dentists out there, we tried to think back on maybe some to-do lists or some how-tos to follow in what we've found to be successful with practice management. So I wanted to start by jumping into one of the most important things in managing a practice is knowing your end game. What are your desires for your practice and what type of practice you want to be in day to day? I've seen a growing trend out there that most dentists think that they want to own multiple dental practices. I think this is a great ambition and a good vision for some dentists. I think that you need to, before you go out and you get a loan and buy the next practice, you need to plan at the outset. A good example, the first associateship I worked in, it was a single practicing doctor and it collected about $1 million a year, and that doctor took home a very healthy salary of $300,000 to $400,000 and he had a staff of about 5 to 7. It was very easy to manage. Day-to-day patient treatment went really well. And over the next 4 years, the practice grew to a $1.2 million practice, a $1.8 million practice. And the dentist reflected and talked to me and said he didn't take anything more home, but now he had a staff of 16, 18, wasn't sleeping as much. So the growth of his practice transformed it into a practice that definitely was worth more and had more success, but wasn't necessarily what he had envisioned. At the same time, he wanted to reproduce this practice and go 3, 4 deep. As long as it is your vision and it's what you know that you want, the steps to lay out and be successful in that process, it's very worthwhile. And so today we want to talk about some of the practice management features we found to make us most successful at Brennan Dental. And the first thing that we would start with is deciding what type of practice you want to be in.
So to that end, setting that vision from the outset is ideal. If you find yourself already in your practice and you don't have that really keyed in, it doesn't mean that you can't start today. So that's one of the first things that we would mention is figure out what that vision or mission or whatever you want to call it, that core philosophy is that's guiding your business decisions going forward. After that's established and you understand the type of practice you want, if we just left it at that, that's kind of nuanced and in the clouds and it's kind of a new agey type of way to think about things. That doesn't net a whole lot. So we're very practical in nature. We need to know what's the next step. Once we know the practice that we want, we need to set some goals of how we're going to get there. And I know a lot of this is kind of classic business components that you hear in other industries, but for one reason or another, sometimes there's a huge disconnect when it comes to the dental field at connecting those dots the same way other industries do. So we found success in refining and understanding what we're about, that vision, that purpose, that mission, and then setting the goals to go and achieve that purpose. When we set those goals, classically, they need to be goals that are achievable. They're not so monstrous that we all believe we can't actually make it happen, but they're measurable for sure. So we have some time constraints or some way to say that we're going to get it done in this amount of time, or that's our goal to do so. And then also to make sure that we can actually check that box of, yeah, we accomplished the goal, or it's so undefined that we can't even establish, did we hit our goal yet or not? That's a very key characteristic to being able to set those goals towards that end vision.
The thing I love about dentistry is you can do whatever you want. You can be a private practitioner, solo in a practice with a limited staff. You can become a business owner and own multiple practices and grow the equity in that and have a big day that kind of cashes out. The issue that I have with it is a lot of us will just kind of fall into a routine instead of sitting back and putting a business plan together. So that's the first step in envisioning what you want and what business plan to have. Another example I'd give is when I, again, first went to an associateship, a dentist across the way from us had no staff. His wife would come in and help from time to time, and it just blew my mind because I watched what the girls were doing day to day, and I knew I couldn't have done it for myself, but he was putting instruments through sterile, answering the phone, doing different things. There's been a time in my career where I've reflected on that and thought how wonderful. His overhead was so simple. He didn't have to worry about payroll, all of these different things, but I know that it wore him thin and it limited his potential. So to tie it back to reality, at Brennan Dental, our vision that we've fine-tuned over the years. And the reason we bring this out first is because we didn't understand this at the outset. We wanted to start a scratch start practice and be as successful as possible, but all we found that to mean was more all of the time. When you fine-tune your vision and you know what you want to accomplish, you can get there faster if you lay the steps out. So at Brennan Dental, we were a scratch start, We knew we wanted to open our single practice here to capacity and then see what opportunities open for us. When I say open to capacity, what I mean by that is clearly it's a partnership. There are two of us that were responsible and in the backdrop. And then we came to find that the hours we were open, it was going to be associate driven. We are open Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. In the beginning, it took so much for us to cover those hours and to be able to offer that to the public. And as a result, we grew like crazy, but we were worn out. So we came to pivot and find we needed associates and we needed help. And we learned through that process we work very well with associates. We want to maintain being open in those hours and having that practice, but it's also facilitated that we build out extra operatories and we continue to grow. Once we're at capacity there, we're going to evaluate and fine tune that business model to make sure that Brennan Dental is operating at its best, and then talk about duplicating that exact process at a second location or continuing to grow our business venture in other ways.
So just as Elliott was describing, the plan is a key part in understanding where I'm headed and how I'm going to get there. And as we refine that plan, it's not to say that it's not something that evolves or needs to change over time, because our desires and our outlook might change as well as our associates or the other components that we have in our practice. So that plan, once set, continues to refine, and our goals to accomplish that plan, we need to continue to measure and monitor and make sure that we're hitting those. Some of the goals that come to mind as I get a little bit more specific on what types of things, is there a silver bullet? Is there that one goal that you can just put out there, and if you hit that, all the rest of the practice just falls in place? I'm not so sure that exists. I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist. But there are some classic ones that everybody tends to follow. Probably the most classic of all that a good practice management foundation should rely on is cash in the bank. It's collections. It's the money that's actually being deposited. So using that as an example, whether you're setting that goal on a yearly basis and tracking that as an office and your team's part of that goal, or you're doing it on a monthly basis, you have a daily goal, any and all of those things kind of help to push you and strive towards that end result. Hygiene visits is a great one to look at. Recare, the percentage of recare, the things that are positives for your practice for long-term sustainable growth, and especially towards that end game. Once you get those goals in place and you measure them, you're better off towards actually fulfilling your set out purpose. Outside of setting the goals, you can't just leave it there, obviously. We have to set, in the business world, the objectives to complete those goals. So the steps, whether it's a daily, monthly, yearly goal, we need the team members around that goal. We need to define the roles and responsibilities. Who's accountable for that portion of achieving that goal?
Again, in a short video here, it's not possible to lay out the exact step-by-step recipe book for how to manage a practice. But some of these principles to follow, setting a vision, setting goals, and outlining objectives, definitely get you well on the way. Again, maybe to give an example of a personal experience that we've had in outlining that, would be setting the goal for a yearly collections that our office is going to obtain and objectives of how we're going to achieve that yearly collection goal. So in our office, we had several metrics that we followed. The front office, treatment planning, and the front office girls had goals for scheduled production. They'd work on building that schedule, presenting treatment, closing it, getting on the schedule, activating recare, building those scheduled dollars. The hygiene department would work solely on hygiene visits. Are there limited exams they can turn to be cleanings? And then the back office would work on gross production, back office production. We planned 2 fillings. Can we add in a third? So as we help them stretch for those goals, those all built toward the greater goal of a collections goal. And then we tied incentives to it. Incentivizing the staff with a trip or quarterly activities or monetary bonuses at payroll periods. And we found that they responded really well to that. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's constantly looking at the numbers and outlining what you want for your practice, what end goals you have, and what objectives you need to get there and to achieve it.
So as you pair out and figure out your vision, your goals, and start having specific objectives to achieve them, one of the most notable questions that should come to mind is, well, how am I supposed to track this? And those key tools that are in your framework come to the surface immediately on how successful you're going to be, how refined are you with the tools that you have. So I thought we'd just take a moment to share some of the things that we use and find to be a huge part of what makes us successful. Now, by our very nature, we're very neurotic, kind of maybe to a fault almost. that we always want to have our hands and our fingers in the data. We want to be able to see the numbers. We want to be able to see what's going on. And so for that reason, our practice management software was one of the most critical decisions we made. We were a scratch startup, so before we even opened our practice, we put a lot of time and energy into researching practice management software, what's out there, what exists, and do they have the features that we need to be able to accomplish those goals. In our case, a cloud platform was essential because, again, we wanted to be able to see this anywhere we were going. And we ended up going with Dentrix Ascend for the various reporting features that existed in there that got the data back out for us. That was huge for us being able to measure those objectives and goals and so on. The other product that we pair up with is, in our case, Google Sheets is what it's called, but really any spreadsheet platform, because it allows us to get raw data, whether we type it in ourselves or bring it from other sources, and kind of mix and match and be able to tell what's going on. So for example, as Elliott mentioned, our incentive system, well, how are we going to track what all of these employees are doing and kind of some customized numbers? We could create kind of a simplified spreadsheet that we can put those numbers into or bring them out of Dentrix Ascend or whatever practice management software people use that you can combine the data but in a very user-friendly way. So those are two huge daily used tools that help us to be able to ultimately attain that vision that we're going after. And in the end, no matter how successful our practice is, if it doesn't align with what we wanted all along, then it's just really not that successful. So that's why we've, more than anything else, stressed that understanding what you want, what fits you, and your partner or associates, et cetera, is really key in being successful in managing your practice.
One final element I want to talk about is growth and how you achieve growth, because we've laid out a vision and a plan for what you want your practice to become, and a lot of times people don't lay out a plan for what their practice is. You have to grow to get to that element. So one thing that we learned in a time of crazy growth, we did a scratch startup that within 2 years went from 0 patients, and I think the first Saturday I worked, we had about $800 come in as I sat there for 13 hours, to 2 years later, having a Saturday where an associate and I had a $22,000 day come in, and it was busy nonstop for 13 hours with 10 employees. So what we learned in that 2 years of crazy growth is hard. We all want growth and we want the end game that comes from it, but growth costs. And I would say there are several ways you can pay for it. One, you can go out and get a loan, have a working capital and a cash influx that helps pay for your growth, whether you're paying an associate to open new hours, to do new marketing, or you can pay for growth yourself. You do your own form of marketing, whether it's social media, knocking doors, getting mailers out that you print up and do yourself, and you come and you sit and you work the hours. Now, that costs you Saturdays and some of the lifestyle things that dentists don't love to give up, but that would be growth on your back. And then there's a third, it's growth on the practice's back. So you work and you don't plan for growth or you don't leverage yourself at all, and as you get cash reserves, you start peeling from your profit and you start putting it back into your practice to grow. But people that think there is a silver bullet for growth that doesn't cost and doesn't hurt, I don't believe that exists. So in setting your vision and outlining the steps and objectives to get there, I think it's important that you incorporate what your rate of growth is and check in regularly on the numbers to make sure you're on pace and you're growing in the way that you want to. For us with a startup, we thought if anyone was going to be sitting here without patients coming in, it was going to be us. Now that was difficult with family and different considerations, but that was how we paid for our growth in the early stages. Now as things have gotten more stable, we leverage a lot of the profit from the business to invest in the business and have future growth. So I think that's something to keep in mind as you set goals and you have these aspirations to become something, you need to plan accordingly.